All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Encouraging Truth series. We are super excited that you are joining us today. My name is Lisa Lejeune. I teach a women's Bible study in Phoenix, Arizona. And we are doing this particular series. It's born out of the coronavirus. This is what we call the series right here, Encouraging Truth, because we want to jumpstart your week. So that's kind of the goal for this particular series that we're doing right now. If you want to know more about our ministry, just go online to womensbiblestudy.com. We have over 350 videos, Bible study videos, that you can watch from there. Our goal is for you to be able to watch Bible study anytime, anywhere. So that's our hope for you if you're bored during this coronavirus time. Today, we have our Encouraging Truth, number 7. And here is what it is. Sometimes what we think about God isn't true. Now, as funny as that seems, it doesn't even seem very encouraging. But the reason why it is going to be an encouraging truth is because many people believe things about God that aren't true. And because of that, when you don't believe something that's true about God, you can become spiritually depressed or spiritually frustrated or just spiritually off because you think like, well, God's mad at me and he hates me and I'm not doing this right. And so we can kind of spiritually crash if we don't know the truth about God. But the good news is this, is that when you learn who God really is, you can trust him that he isn't mad and angry at you, but instead he loves you and always has a purpose for your life. So I want to give you kind of an illustration of what we're talking about today on this whole idea of not really understanding the truth about God. And I want to use it in something that maybe someone has told you. And it's this concept, that if you just do things right, if you just pray right, if you give right, if you just do all the things right, that God is going to bless you. And you will always be happy and you will always be healthy. And if for some weird reason you aren't healthy or you're not happy or things are wrong, it's your fault. And it's your fault because you don't have enough faith or you're just not, reading your Bible enough. And so you're trying desperately to have this kind of faith and you're trying desperately to keep up because you just want God to be happy with you. But instead of being blessed, something bad happens. Like maybe you lost your job, or maybe you got sick, or maybe you got in that car accident. And so now you're completely confused with God. And you're about ready to walk away from your faith because you're like, this God thing just doesn't even work. But it's really all because what someone told you about God isn't really true. I am going to call this spiritual motion sickness. And the reason why I'm calling you that is because I learned this from a helicopter ride that we took many, many years ago. We went to Alaska. Rob loves helicopters, thought it would be super fun to take a helicopter ride, which is awesome, except for the fact that apparently I don't get car sick or motion sick unless I get into a helicopter. All right, so somewhere along the line, that's a breakdown with my life. But I decided to be brave, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to focus my eyes on the back seat. If I don't look out the window, maybe I won't get sick. And everything was awesome until the pilot sees this big monster moose down. He takes the helicopter, and we were doing fine going straight. He flips it to the side, goes like this, and comes right by the moose because he wants us to see it. Now, by that time, I'm like really sick. So I tell him on this little microphone, I said, all right, we have one of two options here. Either I'm throwing up all over the back seat of your helicopter, or you need to land this thing like ASAP. So he lands it, and I jump out because I know I'm gonna be sick. And I'm so incredibly sick that I told him, I said, I'm done with helicopters. I'm walking back. And it's like, he looks at me like we're like hundreds of miles from any known civilization. We're like in the middle of bear and moose country. But it didn't even matter because I just was too sick. And the thought of getting back in that helicopter just wasn't working for me at that time. Now, the reason why I'm talking about that is because I want you to understand motion sickness. Motion sickness is usually because of this. When our eyes get focused on something that isn't moving while the vehicle is moving. In other words, if you are like riding in a car and you're reading a book, then what happens is you're focusing on the book, but the car is still moving. And so our eyes are focused on something steady, but our inner ear is feeling the motion of the car. And there's this conflict between our eyes and our ears. And when we get motion sick, it's because there is this conflict between reality, what our inner ear is experiencing, and this false impression of what our eyes perceive. And as a result, we get dizzy and nauseated and motion sick. Now, I want to liken that to our spiritual life because I think we can get spiritually motion sick. And I think it's when we perceive things about God that we've been maybe taught, maybe you were raised in a religion, maybe your parents raised you, maybe you just had a whacked out pastor, like I don't know, but you were taught something and you believe that about God, but in reality, it's not true. And so spiritually, you're just feeling very, very motion sick because when we believe falsely about God, we become spiritually motion sick. And then we get discouraged. And just like I never wanted to get back into the helicopter again, some people never want to continue on with their faith. So I'll give you an illustration from my own life of this whole motion sickness. We went on vacation a few years ago and we went to California. So we went to California. When we go there, I spend a lot of time, walking on the beach, riding bikes, eating, drinking hot chocolate, having bagels in the morning. Like we do a lot of stuff. And so what would happen is I found myself doing everything other than reading my Bible or praying or even caring about anyone's, salvation. I needed a break. I wanted to be on vacation. So I kind of took a vacation from God, I guess is what it looked like. But because of that, I got spiritually motion sick. And the reason for it is because I was convinced because of that God was mad at me. And I felt convinced that because I didn't do things for him, he wouldn't be there for me. So after we got done with our trip, Rob had to go to China on a trip, and I went to the cabin, which is up in Flagstaff. Nobody was there. I was all by myself. My parents have a place next to us, my brother across the street, but literally no one was there except me in the middle of the forest. And so my friend Erin called me and she said, "Are you afraid?" And I said, "No, I'm really not." And she says, "Well, I'm going to pray that a big angel will stand guard around your cabin." And I said, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that God's really going to send an angel." And the reason why is because, I was just on vacation and I never read my Bible and I really didn't pray and I really didn't care about the things of God while I was gone. And so if we pray for an angel or pray for protection, God is going to say, "Seriously, Lisa? Send you an angel? Like, who are you? You didn't even bother to call on me when you were on vacation. Sorry, all angels are busy." Oh, now, is that even a spiritual truth? And the answer is no, it's not. But my perception was off. And it was because I was believing something about God that wasn't true, which is this, that he only loves me when I'm doing something spiritual. And so it's easy to get discouraged and feel spiritually motion sick when we aren't believing things that are true. So today, I want to take a look at that, and I want to take a look at that by a man by the name of Job. And I want to learn this lesson. And I want to start off with Job 42:5 because I think this is kind of the key for what we're talking about today. Job 42:5 says this. Job says, "I had heard of you only by the hearing of the ear, but now my spiritual eyes see you." His ears and his eyes got together and he became, he wasn't sick anymore. He became spiritually well when the two of them got together and they started understanding the truth about God. Here's what we need to know. We want spiritual eyes to know the truth about God. And so I want to talk about this false view of God that people have when their life turns sideways, when something happens in your life and you just can't put God in that equation with you. So let's talk about Job really quick. Who was Job? He was a very, very righteous man. He served God, loved God. In the Bible, we meet him in Job 1. We'll read this, Job 1, verse 1. "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, And that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And the man was the greatest of all the men in the East. So think about that. Here's this man who is completely blameless, upright, loves God, turns from evil, totally devoted to God and his mission in life. But see, from our human perspective, we just assume that if someone told Job, hey Job, you're only blessed if you do the right things, we just assume that God would bless him for all of his righteousness. But what we learn from Job is this. In reality, that's actually not how God works, which is why we have to read the Bible to find out how God works. See, I think a lot of spiritual motion sickness comes from not really understanding who God is and knowing him. And the only way we're going to know him is to read the Bible and read stories like Job to kind of see how God works. So we see this really weird test of some sorts going in the heavenly realm. And God uses this particular section to teach us thousands of years later the truth about God. Look at this in Job 1 verse 6. One day, the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He's the finest man in all the earth. He's blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. Satan replied to the Lord, yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You've always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You've made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But hey, God, reach out, take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And God says, all right, you may test him. So the Lord said to Satan, do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, that's why we have to read the Bible. Because we have to read the truth about God. And when we do, it changes how we view God when it comes to the difficult times that come into our life. And when we see in the Bible people like Job, we begin to understand that when bad things happen in our life, it doesn't mean God's mad at you. And it doesn't mean that you even necessarily did something wrong. But the story of Job is a reminder that just what Jesus says, in the world, there's going to be trouble. But the good news about what we just read about Job is that here, nothing will ever happen in your life that is not filtered through God's hand with a purpose. See, for everything that Job went through, we, thousands of years later, get a glimpse into this eternal realm. And then you and I know that whenever our world falls apart, we can know absolutely for sure that God has not abandoned us. Let's go on and read verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with the news. Your oxen were plowing with the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided us. They stole all our animals and killed all the farmhands. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. Now that's kind of a bad day when you hear something like that. But then it gets worse. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. More bad news. Now it goes on. While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 band of Chaldeans, raiders, have stolen your camels, killed your servants. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. And if it could not get any worse, here's what happened in verse 18. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly a powerful wind swept from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Now that is a terrifying, horrifying day that I would never wish on anyone. Like, I can't even imagine going through something like that. But you have to go back to the spiritual truth about God. Did God allow this to happen to a super righteous man? And you have to say yes. And so the question for you and I is when heartache or tragedy comes into our life, Based on what we just read, has God allowed it to happen? And the answer is yes. And see, when that happens, you and I have a choice, just like Job did. And Job's wife told him this: you, Job, should curse God and die. She was so angry that she wanted him to curse God and die. But you know what Job did? He was like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. Verse 20 says this: Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. He shaved his head, fell to the ground to what? Be angry at God? No. Look what it says. He fell to the ground to worship. He understood something about God. He said this: I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken away. Praise be the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. And see, with this whole story, we get this glimpse of who God is, because everything Job had to endure, look what we get. We get the privilege of learning how to deal with disappointment in life when tragedy and heartache disrupts our life. And we learn it from this man, Job. Because in one day, his entire world fell apart. He had a great life. He had wealth. He had 10 children. He had servants, livestock, health. For you, that could translate: you have a great spouse, a great marriage, kids that love Jesus, a great job, a good income. Kids are smart, excelling in sports. You just went to the doctor. You passed your physical with flying colors. You have a boat, a beach house, and a plane. Life is good. But imagine in one day if you lost it all. How would you feel about God? And would you be questioning him by God, why did you do this to me? I'm a good person. I go to church. I read my Bible. I teach my small group. But what we learn from Job is a valuable lesson that when things do not go the way we plan, we can be assured that he has never taken his eyes off of us. And this whole scene in Job reminds us of that. And the great part about Job, when he said, blessed be the Lord, he gives and he takes away, is Job just knew God well enough to trust him. But even though he trusted him, he kind of still wanted to know, what am I doing wrong here? But here's what we need to know. Most questions that begin with the word why God, why, usually do not have an answer this side of heaven. And I think my kids will come to me and they'll be like, Mom, why did God, and I always stop them and say, when you say, why did God, I always say, I have no idea. But we have to move it to this. Our question should begin with the word who and not why. And the who is always going to be God is doing something. And the why is, I don't know, but God always has a purpose behind what happens in our lives. Now, the interesting thing about Job is that he had some friends. And he had some friends who really wanted to help him understand this. And so they wanted to come up and they started giving him advice. But unfortunately, this advice gave Job spiritual motion sickness, because the advice that he was getting did not line up with God's character. And so they tried to tell Job, Job, you must have sin in your life. Job, you must be self-righteous. Job, God must be mad at you. It has to be something. Bad things don't happen to people. And yet, what Job's friends were saying was not true. And it was so upsetting to God because of that. None of it was true. And what we learn from this is God really cares about you and I knowing the truth about him, not false things that people say. So God speaks to Job himself. But here's what we learn. Never were Job's why questions ever answered, but Job's who question was made perfectly clear. Look at Job 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind when he starts talking about his friends. He's like, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? In other words, what is wrong with these people? They're not even telling you things that are true. So he tells Job, now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you, Job, instruct me. Now, I think that would probably shake me out of my pity party if that were God speaking to me. So God begins asking Job all of these questions. And by the end of 4 chapters of questions, Job finally gets it. And this is what was made clear to him. The world and everything in it is his, is God's. He, God, does what he pleases for his own purpose, and he doesn't need to be questioned. Here are some of the questions that God asked Job. Hey, Job, where were you? Where were you when I created the foundations of this earth? Hey, Job, where were you when I made the ocean and then the waves stop right here and they don't like come inland? Do you know how to do that? Like, hey, Job, how about light? Do you know where light comes from? Or snow or hail? Or, hey, Job, what about the stars? Better yet, Job, let's talk about hippopotamus and crocodile and eagles. How do they get their food? Do you know who feeds them? Oh, that would be me, God says. In the middle of this questioning, God challenges Job to answer. Job chapter 40, verse 1 says this, Then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? If we find fault with God for the things, he's saying, are you going to contend with me? He says, let him who reproves God answer it. And Job learned so much about God. Even though Job never got the answers he wanted, he did begin to recognize God for who he is. Job's response to God in the first series of questions in Job 40, verse 4, says this. Job just says, I give. Behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer even twice, I will add nothing more. All done. And see, that's our goal. The goal is for us to get to know this powerful, awesome, mighty God. And once we get to know him like Job did, once we get to see his power and we make him so much bigger in our life, then we can walk through this life confident that even if we never get the why question answered, and whatever it is that's bothering you right now, we can trust the who behind it. So many people get motion sickness spiritually, and they walk away from their faith because what they hear and believe are not even true. Here's the truth. God never promised us that everything would go good in our life. But he did promise us that he would always have a purpose for what he allowed into our life. So whatever is going on with you today, I don't want you to be spiritually motion sick. I don't want you to be confused because somebody told you something that isn't true. Because here's the truth. The truth is life is difficult and life changes. We just saw this with the coronavirus, one little virus that was with one person in like China has devastated this world. But the encouraging news is this, that even when bad things happen, doesn't mean God is mad at you or God is mad at me. It means that maybe something even bigger. He has plans for you. He wants to use whatever is bad for something good. Think of how he used Job's life and all the sadness and heartache and destruction thousands and thousands and thousands of years later to teach us something valuable about God. See, our job is to get to know this awesome God, just like Job did. So that no matter what comes into our life, we don't have to feel the spiritual motion sickness and wonder, like, why is God doing this to me? But instead, we can be people just like Job, who at the end of the day says, you know what, God? I know that you give and you take away. And see, that's the truth. And it doesn't mean God is mad at you, but it does mean that we can get to know him. And when we do, we become, our ability is to be able to trust and know what he is doing. The encouraging truth is this today, is that your view of life and the bad things that happen to you will change when you spend time getting to know the truth about God. I hope you have a really good day today and a great week.